Today I'm going to talk about my memories of the types of students that I can remember there were in my school. Best I can. I was the very serious, bookworm-ish, just academically gifted kind of student. I took school seriously. I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't clown around. I was always on time. I never skipped. I was the absolute definition of a model student. Straight A. And if you don't believe it, I have my progress reports and commentary from my teachers. No one had a damn bad thing to say about me for my entire school career, the 13 years that I assisted. If you also want to count Head Start, then that would be 14. And I take great pride in that because boy, could I have been influenced into other kinds of behavior, but I decided to just believe my mom, not give her any trouble and not give my teachers any trouble. And I was also convinced by how it was important to develop that good habit anyway of being a good student, and that way I could grow up into a disciplined adult. That's what I envisioned, that's what I was promised, and I saw the advantage. I was convinced. Unfortunately, that had some consequences, which were me being hard on myself and me being very tolerant of people who were different from me in that regard, especially as an adult. Anybody without a sense of responsibility, it's like, I want zero to do with you. But now I look at it as, if I'm gifted in that regard, if I was invested in and developed like that, and this is an issue that someone has that they need to work on, then I guess people like me need to exist to coach those people, but also those people need to exist to coach people like us to not take life so seriously. That's about me. That's the description about me. However, on my classmates, of course, I observed the one student that you can imagine I liked the least. This was the absolute class clown. They were disruptive. If they were talking about things that had nothing to do with the topic. They never ever asked questions, especially questions that were pertinent to the topic. They always tried to get the teacher sidetracked, or when the teacher wasn't watching, they were always trying to do something, throw something, bully someone else. And if they weren't making any noise or talking, whatever, they were just doing things. They usually did not complete their work, their grades sucked, and I just never made friends with people like this. Then you had the one student who for some reason they just were absent a lot, and then they had to make up for those days pretty often. The person who was absent often, I never really got to know why they were absent. Was it because they were sick? Were they absent because they were skippers? Were they absent because of home situations? That could be a thing. I wish I would have found out the reason for that. So if you guys ever knew somebody who was absent a lot, let me know if you ever found out what were their reasons, because I have no idea what could cause a child to miss so many days of school. Another type of student was the type of student who was absolutely gifted in sports. They were magnificent. They had a great performance. They were good football players, volleyball players, basketball players, sometimes all of those at the same time, baseball players, softball players, swim team, even gymnastics to cheerlead. But for some reason, they weren't always the best in class when it comes to their grades. But you also had the squad of athletes who I guess got help maintaining their grades. And I remember that I personally helped someone who was athletic with a social studies assignment. And I thought, how is it that you don't get this? Social studies is like the most common sense, easy class ever, but for some reason you need help. Whatever. But now looking back, I'm like, the cost of you being a good athlete is that your studies would have to suffer a little bit. And then the athlete, I admired them, but at the same time I didn't. I admired them because of what they could do sports-wise, but at the time I never looked at it as, well, their parents are able to invest in them to do that type of thing. My mom can't, and if they have those talents in middle school and high school, is because they have been doing this for a while. And even if you had never been part of a team, maybe that is something that you just practiced growing up. I never practiced any sports. Now that I'm older, I wish I could go back to that time and be a little nicer to myself when I tried out for sports and I never made it into any team. I'm like, well, this skill level doesn't come from just me casually playing in school. It actually comes from people who have had experiences in the sport, being formally coached, just like people who know how to play musical instruments for real. Now, I just wish that I could go back to tell myself, hey, it's okay that you're not good at any of this because you haven't been invested in. But I just remember for a while that I just always wished that I were the athletic kid, but I never gave myself credit as, maybe I don't have the problems that the athletic kids have, which is I don't have trouble getting my assignments done, making good grades on my own, not getting tutoring, not getting assistance, not copying people's homework. Shit, people were copying or trying to, because I very, 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 very seldom ever allowed anyone to just outright copy. The only time I would let you copy me is if you were at my level, but for some reason you tell me that something happened and I can corroborate it somehow, that you couldn't get your homework done, but normally I know you to be academically about the same level as me. I think, okay, if it were me, I would want someone to help me breeze by it too. Especially if I kind of quiz you on the go and you're able to prove that you know the material. It's not you're just feeding off me, then I had no trouble helping you with that. I didn't have any hard feelings. The other kind of student is the kind of student who is an absolute avid reader. They just know everything. They have read everything. In some cases, they have seen everything movie-wise. And I'm like, I have no idea about any of that. Another type of student is the student that really excels in the arts. They know how to draw, they're good in theater, in some cases they're also good in music. And that was another type of student that I can say I had a degree of jealousy toward, because I'm like, damn, I'm just good at the core classes, but I'm not talented in sports and I'm not talented in art or music or theater either. Interestingly enough, when it comes to theater, I feel like I could do it, but my stage fright would get to me. And I think I would have done a whole lot better if I would have practiced that a little earlier on, if I had better direction. Because if I'm given a script and you expect for me to just act it out, it depends on who I'm paired with, what kind of chemistry we have. But now as an adult, I think that would be the class that I could absolutely kill, because I feel like I can project many things now that at the time I wanted to project, but I was just really awkward about it. But now I know how to bring some of that stuff out, because I have done a little bit of studying of music and I have observed opuses a little differently. And I'm more critically observant now, something that back then with stuff like this I used to not do. So now I'm pretty sure that if you were to throw me into a role, I think I could adapt to it very quick. If you tell me what kind of conclusion you're looking for, if you tell me, oh, I need for this character that you're reading to be sassy, it's like, okay, I can put my sass on. But if you also would like a more maternal kind of character, I can definitely project that one as well. And then another type of student, I think, is the student that was really quiet because maybe they got picked on very often based on their appearance. And they weren't necessarily good in class. They didn't have the best grades, but they didn't necessarily have the worst grades. I feel like this is a student that had a degree of low self-esteem, and they just needed to be directed, guided, coached, and they had the potential of being fed into being good students. But in some cases, this student may end up being neglected because they are perceived as just average, weak, and maybe eventually this is the student that they'll either turn to the light side or they'll turn to the dark side. Then there's also the kind of student that and this is the one that drove me up a wall the most. For some reason, they're just stupid, fucking popular, and it's because they have money, and maybe they are deemed kind of attractive because they also happen to play sports and therefore they maintain a good shape. But they're not necessarily the most academically gifted out there. But there is a degree of maybe some things happened behind the scene to ensure that this student had a slightly better position, because there were some students who were ranking higher than me, but I wasn't understanding how or why when we would take the same classes and they would admit aloud that they weren't performing quite as well as they could be, but then all of a sudden their scores were somehow higher. I'm pretty sure that there was a little bit of a business going on behind the scenes, and then ultimately some of these people also somehow, even though they didn't have the best credits, ended up getting scholarships. And I never understood that, but who am I to say anything? I'm not here to judge. You do what you gotta do to get yourself ahead, I guess. That was the one student that I found most suspicious. And then another type of student that I can recall is, this is kind of me, but much more amplified, which is, this is the student who took school very seriously because they wanted to make sure that, given that they don't have a privileged background, they wanted to make it to college, they wanted to have the highest grade. For some reason, they just wanted to be the best at everything. They wanted to be the valedictorian, whatever, the highest score ever, because they wanted to make it to the best college. They wanted a full ride, yada yada. For me, it's like, I wanted to perform well, but I always knew that I wasn't going to take the college route. So it didn't make sense for me to kill myself too much, considering that none of that was in my agenda. So it didn't really make sense. And because it didn't make sense, I decided that, hey, I'll make the good grades, but I won't necessarily be as overachieving as my capacity allows me to. I didn't care about being perfect in math. I didn't care about taking all AP classes because I valued having time to actually rest and chill out, and I didn't want to feel the pressure of competition. So there's a part of me that wishes that back then maybe I would have pushed myself ever so slightly at taking more challenging classes, but I'm glad that I didn't, because I feel like that would have developed in me the habit of, no matter what, I have to overachieve. And even now, presently at work, I do still have overachieving tendencies, and now I'm learning to kind of let go of that, because I find that ultimately that's not important. That's not the point of life. When it comes to school, there's a part of me that, for the sake of taking advantage of what was being offered at the time, I wish I would have taken it maybe slightly more challenging level. But then I also think, nah, I did the good thing. I did the best that I could based on how I was feeling and what I felt I could realistically handle. Because if I'm struggling with depression and loneliness now, back then with more academic commitments, it would have been terrible. And I just did not feel like doing that to myself, because again, what is the point if I'm not going to college? And then there was the kind of student that, for some reason, they weren't necessarily the class clown. They were not the disruptive kind, but for some reason, everybody knew them. Everywhere they went, it was lit. They knew everyone in every class, or they knew somebody in every class. This is better than the popular student, because the popular student, they're just popular because of the status that they inhabit, the status that they have, as opposed to, oh, you became popular because of your actions, because of what you do for people, instead of, I'm popular because I dress pretty, or I happen to be the captain of whatever sport. I think that's a status kind of popularity. But then there's that one person who, they do not necessarily have the highest grades. They may not even be into any sports or whatever, but they are popular amongst everybody because of how they are. They're good with people. They are good at socializing. They're good at being out there. They're just willing and able to be everywhere. And that's not something that I could do.